without any further ado, we have a great panel this evening to talk about misinformation, disinformation. I'm going to call Lani up here to both introduce our panelists and to go ahead and moderate the meeting. Thank you, Lani.
Hello. Thank you so much for letting me bring this topic to your attention. This is something that is very near and dear to my heart. Mis and disinformation. It is a topic that has impacted all of us who read the news, watch the news, take a look at anything on social media. And all of us are impacted. So it's something that we're trying to address. And we are very fortunate tonight on our panel. We have Joe Schoenmann from KNPR, the news director. And if you ever listen to State of Nevada, he's the man who knows. And we also have with us Maria-Teresa Liebermann-Parraga with Battle-Born Progress. And she will be speaking to us as well on this information. After we go through the panel discussion, we will open up the floor for discussion, questions, and answers. Okay? All right. To get started, I'd like to
Let's move that around.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm on both microphones and you'll have to be patient as we pass it along. All right, so first of all, what I wanted to ask was, Maria-Teresa, can you explain a bit what is misinformation and can you cite some examples of it?
All right, so misinformation. Misinformation, and we'll talk about it later, is different than disinformation in that misinformation is actually accidental forms of false information. For example, if I were to name something incorrectly, or people calling disinformation misinformation is sort of misinformation because you're accidentally calling it the wrong term. So it's not a piece of information that is incorrect that is strategically created or distorted to lie and to show false news. It's someone that is just simply doing or saying something incorrectly. Like, for example, I hate to say, but sometimes reporters either don't get a name right or they get something wrong, and you'll see that they'll, correct it. And that's when you correct a piece of misinformation, is that was incorrect, now we're correcting it. So it's really just a simple mistake, but something that was wrong, factually incorrect.
And
I can go into disinformation if we want to, if people want to see the comparison right away. And I'll actually add in another layer of malinformation. So disinformation is sort of in the middle tier of dis and mis and malinformation. Disinformation is where there's a grain of truth, an event that actually happened. For example, January 6th. We know it was a day and a time when Congress was supposed to have a procedure to formally elect and declare President Joe Biden. Now, disinformation is, for example, many people calling what happened during January 6th a simple protest, right? Or there was no violence. That's disinformation, right? There is a grain of truth because January 6th happened. We all saw it. There was a protest in the beginning. However, it turned into an insurrection. It turned into a violent act. And now we know that it is true because there has been evidence, there has been court rulings, and those court procedures have gone through all of that. So it's factually accurate that it was more than just a simple protest that went wrong. It was actually a coordinated attack on the Capitol. That's disinformation. So you're taking something that either happened or has a little bit of truth, and you're running with it and creating a whole other narrative, a whole other story to confuse people. Malinformation is the more malignant type. And this is the one, and deep fakes kind of come in here, because malinformation is something that was completely created to confuse. There's no grain of truth. It's, for example, you create a deep fake video of Joe Biden saying something that he did not say, and in an event that did not happen, but you just splice together something and you put it out on social media and you say, look at that. This happened on this day, and it didn't happen. And how do you know it didn't happen? Because you can't find news outlets that reported on it, actual news outlets, not a podcast. You can't find any other people referring to it. So malinformation is the sort of more, I hate to say it, but perverse form of information, false information, because it's actually created with no truth whatsoever in it.
Okay, so we have an idea of what misinformation is, disinformation, and malinformation. Why would anyone spread these types of false narratives? What is the motive for people to spread these? What is their purpose? Can you guess?
Yes, and it's interesting that you bring up the motive, because we'll talk a little bit about motive. Motive comes into the strategy to responding to it. So it depends on the actor. If it is disinformation, I would say that the motive for a lot of the people, going back to our example for January 6th, they're not calling it an insurrection and a violent act because they don't want to go to jail. Or they want, or they want to keep lying about what happened. But really, the specific motive, it depends on the source and on sort of the context and contextual environment for that piece of information. It might be because you want to get elected into office, because you want to get that person impeached. We'll probably see a lot of false information with a certain president who a certain McCarthy wants to impeach. But it really depends on the person, but it all leads to consolidate power and to either maintain your power or gain your power. I am not a fan of Scientology, sorry if you are, but there was a saying that L. Ron Hubbard said, the reason why Scientology focuses so much on public relations is because, and he said this originally, is if you are a master at public relations, you win the war. And a lot of people have said that if you manage the narrative, if you manage the PR war, you kind of win the war. And sadly, that's what happened in 2016. So it really is to either get power or keep your power.
Joe, I'm going to ask you a question so you're not just the
No, I don't mind
microphone
doing this.
expert. You've heard what Maria-Teresa has spoken about. You do live news. KNPR is live, your broadcast. You are hooked up with national NPR radio, but you do a show that focuses very deeply the state of Nevada. How do you know what your guests are speaking about? How do you go about vetting them when your producers and you say, we want to do a show on this topic? How do you know who to ask?
That's a good question, and it really has to do. We plan things out a couple of weeks ahead of time. So when we have a guest who's going to be coming on, we know a few weeks ahead of time, and a big part of it is the research that's involved before they come on. So, for instance, before last fall's gubernatorial election, we interviewed Joey Gilbert, who was running against Joe Lombardo to become governor for the third Republican nomination. And he was one of the foremost leaders of the election deniers. And I don't think it took much research to find out that the election actually happened and it was real. But he insisted even on the radio, I don't know if any of you have heard that interview, that you know, the election was not real. He yelled at me on the radio, and he parsed words, parsed my words because he's a lawyer. He wanted exact words known, but we had enough research done beforehand that there was just no denying it. There was no, I don't want to say backing down from it, but it was just a statement of fact. We kept talking about it until he just had to let it go. So the basic thing, and the only way I see how in the future, how people are going to be able to recognize disinformation, and more of it is malinformation, is by doing their own research, because with AI, it is going to become almost impossible to tell a photo that is fake from a real one. I mean, you could see it even today. It's virtually impossible. So there are going to be programs, apps out there that will allow you to dissect photographs, allow you to dissect words, to see where the words came from, where they originated. I think a lot of you saw this during the 2016 election. For instance, the one thing I always remember is a photo of somebody in Ohio, supposedly with election boxes that had been stolen. I don't know how many people saw that, but I just think that one always comes to mind. It was a complete fabrication, and it was a couple photos that were knitted together. Now imagine that being done with AI. It's going to be almost impossible to find where that came from. And like I said, I am certain there are people working to create AI to do this in a really good way. And on the other side, there are going to be people creating apps to help you dissect it and find out what's real. I think that's going to be the only way we're going to be able to do it. I mean, some things on their face are just patently false. The election denying thing, that was, I mean, how could you, you know, it was kind of ridiculous, you know, that it kept going on for so many years and months. The same thing with the riot at the Capitol, when people kept saying, and they still to this day say, it was a simple protest. We all saw the results. The people who died during the riot and after from, you know, the anxiety and the effects from that. So I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, it's research. It's all going to make us read a lot more online. Being politically aware isn't going to be simple anymore. You're going to have to rely on really reliable news sources. You know, there's so many examples of this, and a lot of these questions deal with that. During COVID, we all know anti-vaxxers. We all know people who wouldn't wear masks. And then we saw people who would send research that proves not getting a vaccine is the way to go, that ivermectin was the way to go. I have a brother in Chicago who sent me literally thousands of articles, but I would never see those same articles in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. And he would just poo-poo them. He would not get a subscription to them. He has enough money to do that, but he would get these really obscure websites and get the information that fit his point of view. And that is always going to happen. So what we all of us have to do, and this is what I do every single morning when I go in, is read everything I can from legitimate news sources where people have been trained to be journalists. It's not as simple as going on TikTok and creating a 60-second video. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of research and a lot of phone calls. It's interesting. A lot of people say my job is really interesting, and for the 1 hour that I do the show, it's fascinating. I really enjoy it. You know, as you all know, if you've ever managed people, that's not so great all the time. I like working with people, but probably the most interesting part of that job is doing the research and getting this kind of information, and that's what we're all going to have to do.
Which leads me very nicely into, where do you get your information from? I brought together a media bias chart that I found that was made available by an advertising agency, as noted on the bottom, Ad Fontes Media. But what this chart shows, and we brought in to pass out here, it shows the media slant leaning from far fact reporting to contains inaccurate or fabricated information. And then if it is middle of the road or extreme left or extreme right. And this media bias chart, and it's updated annually, has a lot of information on news sources where people can get their media from. And I would like to ask you, Joe and Maria-Teresa, to make comment as you take a look at the chart. And I will note that NPR is dead right and center, maybe slightly left.
And, I'll be brief here, Maria. I don't see the New York Times on here, by the way. I looked everywhere for it, but I look at this chart. I've known about this for several years. This reminds me of the time when Donald Trump came to and spoke at the casino very close to here, Sunset or Suncoast Station, or maybe it was Rampart. And there were lines of people on the road as his motorcade came in, and some guy came up to me and said, you know, asked where I was from, and he kind of scoffed. And then he said, well, where do you get your news? I said, the New York Times. And he said, how can you believe that? How can you believe what the New York Times writes? I just told him, because they have professional, the New York Post, they have professional journalists. It's some of the best writing you'll find. And I've worked in newspapers, not to that caliber, but I know how concerned they are about mistakes, and you can see them actually correct their errors in that paper. So he was saying, you know, Fox News, why don't you turn to Fox News and listen to that? And you can't win arguments like that. I think we all know that by now. The arguing over this stuff is not the way to go anymore. The only way to talk about this with other people is to kind of be genial with them, which I hope when you listen to our show, you see that people are doing, people from opposite sides of the fence, and just try to come to points of understanding in certain small areas. Sometimes I think you can do that if you can get somebody to read or listen to some of these top tier, these middle, and I'm so glad to see NPR remains near the top and in the middle of this. Get them to listen to some of these outlets. Maria.
Yeah, ditto to all of that. And what I would add here is that, you know, looking at this, it's pretty accurate. I would say TMZ is known to kind of just go this way, that way, depending on where the money comes from. But I would agree that it has gotten incredibly hard to even have a conversation with people that are fans or readers of the folks that are here in this corner in the bottom right. And it is something that is so difficult to do that we've now hired on, Mike is here, disinformation program managers, and a lot of groups like ours are creating departments and creating positions to really understand this issue we have with information. And where is it coming from? What are the motives? But also, how do we combat it? And a lot of times it depends on the issue, and it depends on who you're talking to, because I remember one of the first trainings that I had on disinformation by some experts on it is that it has gotten so bad that you kind of almost have to send these people to cult deprogramming. That cult deprogramming and disinformation work is kind of coming together, because people that work in cult deprogramming say that the symptoms that people have of just, for example, saying, no, New York Times isn't true, InfoWars is true, 100%, even if you show them multiple ways in which it's not true, you can fact check it, but they are just so brainwashed, which is what it is, into believing them that it's all of these outlets and all of the personalities, for example, a Joe Rogan, are such cults of personality now that people are so attracted to the personality, to the community that these outlets have created, which is something that, even though it's evil, it was pretty genius. If you kind of don't do it. Don't go on their Twitters, don't go on their social medias or watch them, but they're very personable. They make it very accessible so that you feel like you're part of the community. You feel like you're talking to a friend. You feel like you're talking to someone who, I'm not one of those highfalutin journalists. I'm just a person with an opinion. And sadly, some people argue it's the fault of our education system. People just want things easy. People just don't want to do that research. And there's also, a lot of people that think that maybe you can also address this in the education system, right? That when we teach kids English literature, why don't we teach them media literacy, right? And sort of internet literacy. We teach you how to read a book and analyze it, read a poem and analyze it, but read a news story and analyze it. Read a fake news story and analyze it. How do you research something? How do you actually go out and find out what is factual versus not? We are so now, we are in a place where we can access so much information, and it has turned into something we can't control because people are not equipped with the ability to research, to be media literate. They don't know how. And so that's where they fall prey to the Joe Rogans, the Sean Hannitys, the InfoWars of the world, with like these exciting personalities that make sense to them with false news.
Thank you so much. And I'm getting nice signs from people that they want to see the chart. If you let me know, I can text it or email it to anybody who's on Zoom. And Hunter just told me he'll put it out on Facebook. All right. Maria-Teresa, one of the things I wanted to discuss was mis and dis and mal information in some of our minority groups or minority communities. And I will share a personal experience I had. My house in our neighborhood is easily identified by every Democratic poster stuck in my yard, to the high irritation of my HOA. But I followed the rules, and my cleaning lady, who I absolutely adore, and she does a great job, asked me why I was voting for Joe Biden, because she is not. And I asked her who she was going to vote for, and she said, "He who shall not be named 45. And I asked her why. And she said, well, he's a businessman. He knows how to help me in my small business. And I asked her, how did she know he would help her? Why, I got a check signed by him for money. And I said, well, Nancy Pelosi and a whole bunch of Democrats really got you that check, but well, his name was on it. Why is mis and disinformation so prevalent within the Hispanic and other minorities here in Las Vegas? What is the cause of this?
Oh boy. Oh boy. I have a whole other panel on this one. So that is the $1 million question. And first, the why is because they want our votes. I am Latina. I was born in Mexico, and I see it in my community all the time. I see my mother getting bombarded with fake news in the Facebook groups that she's in the blogs that Facebook is encouraging her to follow for some weird reason, with the things that her friends and her coworkers at the hotels would say, like, And we were always she was always the person that, you know, they know that I work in politics and in communications, and they would say, hey, can you ask your daughter if this is true? And I would read the article and I say, there's no newspaper called this. That's not true. And that's actually when we started working specifically on Latino disinformation, which is what my specifically works on, because it's a whole other beast. And it's because they want our votes, but they're not actually going to deliver on the promises. If it hadn't been for Nancy Pelosi, your cleaning lady would not have gotten that check with his fancy signature on it. But yet they did such, they do so much to actually work to getting the Latino community and even the APIA community. That's sort of the next community, the Asian American community, because they know that if they say the right buzzwords, if they show the right quote unquote values that we share, that you can get those people that can be moderate or lean a little right on some economic issues because they're business people, they're small business people, and they'll use those tropes to get those people in the door. And then they'll get them with everything else. And it is prevalent. It is scarily prevalent in the Latino community. It is so bad. We had in both 2020, 22 elections, we had people that were canvassing in Latino communities and they were hearing QAnon. Is Pizzagate true? And like, to people canvassing the doors, you know, they didn't want to talk about certain things. They were just like, hey, I've been reading this on the internet and yeah, I care about the economy, but is Pizzagate true? Did Hunter Biden really do all those things? And so it is a specifically targeted attack and the reason why there's this void of information is because in Latino communities specifically, and even API communities, but really Latino communities, there is not a lot of information in their language. And in many minority communities, there's not information in their language. I wish we had an NPR in Espanol, right? With a Spanish-speaking Joe giving me the state of Nevada. You know, we have small things like the Nevada Independent with Luz Gray and lots of other things, but those are sort of insider baseball things. There's not really, you know, you have Telemundo, you have Univision, but they're not as fully funded as some of your CNNs, as your New York Times. You know, there's no national newspaper in Spanish. You can try to find translated versions of articles, but it takes a lot more work for minority communities to find information. And so they're the perfect prey for malinformation and disinformation. And the other layer to add on top of that, Latino communities, for example, are not just getting bombarded with malinformation from here, but from other countries. For example, there is a scary trend in a lot of Latin American countries, especially Mexico, my home country, where, you know, actual journalists are being jailed, and fake journalists that want to spread fake news to please the president and please certain lawmakers are keeping their jobs and are the ones that are staying in place in TV outlets and newspapers and radio. So now, and a lot of it is coming from Russia. Yes, it is actually a whole thing that they're doing. It's like the Cold War all over again. And so now, for example, I see family that's still in Mexico sharing pretty scary things. And I'm like, hold on a second. Is that real? Well, it's, you know, it's by this outlet. And then I Google that outlet and all of a sudden you find out, if you research that outlet, you see they just fired and jailed a lot of its reporters and journalists because they did not want to just simply copy paste a press release from the president and things like that. So that's an added layer that we're combating with the Latino community. And it's a scary, scary time to be someone that is on social media, because that's also where a lot of minority communities go to, because you don't have a traditional media outlet for you that reflects your community, that speaks your language. So you go to social media. And that was part of the void too, that sadly the Trumps of the world, through this entire echo chamber that they've created, have been able to get into people's trust as a small business or a businessman, or as, just someone that is spreading fake news, but they start by sounding kind of like the outlets that we were talking about. They start with presenting themselves as someone accessible, someone that can help you, someone that is your friend or your champion. And that's how they get, people in the Latino community.
I just want to add one thing. To me, the key to this is education. And, I don't think I can say that enough times. It's strictly education. And when I hear things in this state where we have a lot of our state leaders, I guess it is justifiably so that they want more people to maybe not go to a four-year college and instead get into the trades. That worries me, because I think when you go to a four-year college, part of the mission of a university is to teach you critical thinking. And if you're just going to go into a trade, a lot of people say, well, yeah, after I make money, I will get back to an education. But how many times does that actually happen? I worry about that a lot. I mean, and I've talked about it on our program quite a bit with people. I also, I don't think I can say it enough. It's education. I think what's happened with the Supreme Court decision on universities and whether or not they can, I guess I'll just call them quotas, have quotas for certain minority groups, is going to hurt a lot more, especially the people Maria was just talking about. And it's just crucially important. This democracy, that the republic we have, won't survive if people aren't educated, and they can't ferret out the fake from the real. And that's what I think is at the heart of all of this, really. And what's heartening to me is when I moved to Las Vegas 26 years ago, the level of education and educated the populace here has really increased. I've been on the radio for 8 years. I can just tell from the people who call in how much it's changed. And so that's heartening for me. And I came from Wisconsin, which is touted education for many, many years. And I'm sort of glad I'm not there anymore when I see the direction it's going politically. The great thing that's happening in Nevada is it has become a moderate state. It's very purple. I think that's for the best. I know Belleville Progress works hard at the Democratic principles here, the Democratic Club, but I think that balance is really key to improving things here, and I've seen it happen here. So that's awesome.
All right, I wanted to make two comments about both of the things that you both said. One, I am born in Hawaii, Honolulu, Hawaii, and I know the AAPI community. And yes, there is a great deal of disinformation in my own home state, which is very shocking to me. But when I go back and read different posts made from old friends and family, it's very much eye-opening. So yes, I agree with what you said about an echo chamber within that minority group. Your other comment, Joe, was on education. And after 45 years in corporate business, I went and taught college for 16 years in Cincinnati and then later here in Nevada. And I am a very big proponent of education. You can't ever get enough. You never quit learning. The day you stop learning like a shark, you're gonna die. So I push a lot of reading, basics, seek truth in your own way. And this is where I want to go with this. What can the Red Rock Democratic Club, how can I influence my own cleaning lady? What can we do to promote good information that we spread that we can say, yes, I know this is true. And I'm sorry not to slam you down too hard, but that is not true. How do we go about with that alternative speech? Joe, since you're closest.
We talked about this actually right before the 2022 election with an expert on this topic. And there is no slamming. It never, ever works. It never works. I'll just say that several times. People will just become more guarded and they'll be more against you. What she talked about was you just have to find one, talk to people, listen really, really hard, and find one grain of connection with them. Focus on that grain of connection, even if it doesn't have to do with the topic at hand. Ivermectin or election deniers, anything. Find that commonality. See the humanity in each other. Because I mean, when you eliminate the politics from the people you're talking to who are very opposed to you, you do see that they are just so much, we're all basically the same. We all basically want the same things. We want happiness. We want to have a secure life. We want to have a job, a family. They just all, from misinformation or disinformation or malinformation, they believe that the way it's going to come about is entirely different from you. First, you find that commonality, that humanity in each other, and then you go from there and you just talk to each other. That was basically her solution to this. And her worry, the way that I remember that radio segment ended was that people do less and less of that because of social media.
Right.
That a meeting like tonight just does not happen as much anymore because people could connect online rather than looking people in the eye and talking to them directly.
I totally agree with all that, although we will always slam the purporters of disinformation. But not the regular people. If you are a Joy Gilbert, you deserve, us slamming you on Twitter because you're the one out here profiting from the people you're brainwashing. But when you're in front of your cleaning lady or your neighbor or someone, I think that is a different conversation that you need to have. And I want to go back to when I was a kid organizer for the Obama campaign. I worked in both of his campaigns, and there are many people that were surprised and still are surprised that a Democrat with a name like Barack Hussein Obama could win certain states and certain counties where you had, people that really weren't fans of any kind of democratic idea. And I always say the reason why we won is we talked to people, actually went in, and I would say the first thing, using that experience, the first thing you have to realize is you're not going to get the person in the first conversation. You're not going to, we used to, score people on a point level of persuasion. A 6 means they're over here totally against you. A 1 means they're a total supporter. You're not going to turn a 6 to a 5 even, or a 4 in one conversation. It's a continual conversation that you need to have. And the first step is that connection that you have. And we were trained in both cycles with the Obama campaign by, they brought in experts that did research on that, on how do you sit down with someone or on the phone or on the doors, actually connect with someone when you only have 5 minutes and they don't want to talk to you because you're with a campaign and they're tired of all the rhetoric. And it's especially if there's someone that you're persuading, and it's by saying why, just simply saying the word why. And posing that question instead of, you going right to your script of all of your things. Why do you believe that? Kind of like you asked your cleaning lady, why? And now it's because she's a business person and she's connected with Trump because of, she thought he helped her, which is not the case, but at least you got into the door of getting your first why. And when you actually ask someone why, it makes them feel valued. It makes them feel like, oh, is should be. And so you really kind of eliminate the entire conversation around politics, and you talk about you yourselves as human beings, and you can say, well, this is why I believe and have my belief. And the reason is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And having multiple conversations like that with someone and understanding it is not going to happen in a day, a month. It took us organizing, for example, in the Obama campaign, months, a year. We would spend a year knocking on people's doors and on phone number, calling them on the phone, et cetera, because that's how long it takes interactions with people and get at the root level of, well, why is it that you care about this? And actually developing that relationship. I remember I organized in North Carolina with a highly diverse, I had very progressive people up in the Northwest, and then I had those ladies who lunch who have quite a bit of money down in Southern Charlotte, and I would go meet them at the Panera Bread and I would just sit down and get to know them. And we ended up, for months and months and months of work, we ended up having those ladies at the golf club host volunteer events. But it's because we sat down with them, we got to know them a little bit, and that's what it takes. It's a little bit harder now than it was maybe, 10 years ago when I was an organizer because of social media, but that's where you start. You find a way to connect with someone, you try to understand them. And the other gentleman, because the conversation is totally different. If you're able to meet someone, if you're part of like a person ever, and try to understand their why, and understand you're not going to deprogram them right away. It's going to take a couple tries, but it's going to take you understanding them and kind of correcting them, because they've been brainwashed too.
Okay. All right. Before I open up the floor to Q&A, and I see some of you going, yes, me, I want to ask our panelists, Joe and Maria-Teresa, anything else you want to add before we get into Q&A? Now is your time.
Not really. I want to hear these questions. Like I said, I think earlier, the way things have gone now have turned us all into researchers, and the focus of our conversation tonight is misinformation, disinformation, and we all have to sort of do it on our own. I mean, or listen to NPR. One of those two.
Listen to NPR and read the AP and the New York Times is what I'll leave you with, and tell your friends. But the other thing that I would say too is stay tuned with BBP. We've got a lot of stuff in the works, especially with our new Latino anti-disinformation program manager, who's going to have awesome things in the works on how to get actually people involved in combating disinformation in real time. So stay tuned on what we have, because this problem is not going to go away. It's going to get worse, especially for 2024, especially with deep fakes. And there are apps. There are already a lot of designers that are figuring out how to tell a picture being fake or not. And they're developing that, and hopefully we get access to that.
Absolutely. All right, Chris Solomon, how do you want me to do Q&A with the microphones back and forth? Just sit right here. Go ahead and line up, and we'll try and pass this around and get answered. And thank you folks on Zoom for being so patient. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try and address those as well. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Walt. Chris with KNPR. And the question really is the technology that scares the chiefs out of the budget. As an example, Vladimir Putin has great incentive to see the former president become president. And I'm sure at this point today, he's got his arsenal of people working on artificial intelligence to again interfere with elections. So what is your perception of what can be done about that? Because I'm sure it's being done right now. It's going to be in full force next year. So where are we at with that in combat?
Well, let me rephrase your question so the people on Zoom could hear it. You're concerned about the next election and the possibility of Mr. Putin influencing the way our voting goes. Is that right? Yes, with AI.
I think one of the benefits that we have this go around is the fact that we've been through it before. People are going to be much more aware of it, and that's kind of what we've been talking about here. The difficulty is going to be ferreting it out. In a way, there are going to be people who are in that camp who are going to believe it. There are going to be people who will never believe it. And then those in between are going to be the people like yourselves who are going to do the research to find out what is real. I mean, maybe some of the stuff you don't want to believe is actually real. It'll be up to you and also to us. But, you know, a lot of our information, when we localize a national story like that, we're getting it from the good sources who have hundreds of reporters who are able to do this kind of stuff. They've synthesized it already for us, and we're just sort of synopsizing it and looking at it at the local level. It's going to be very, very difficult. I will say this, if you are worried about it, we have, when we have Republican Warren Hardy on our program, he's a former state senator. Several times on our show in the last couple of months, he has said, if Donald Trump is nominated as a Republican, whoever the Democrat is going to win, because he knows so many Republicans who have fallen away from Donald Trump, and that goes not just for Republicans, but also the independent voters. So that might put you at a little ease if that's what your worry is. But the answer to your question is it's a difficult one. It's just something that fortunately we are all much more aware of it now because of what we've seen in the past. Yeah.
I'm and I'm working polls last election. And I have more than a handful of people telling me that there's people registered vote that aren't Americans. I'd like to see more of the state speak to different areas in civic groups, or we'd be talking to the choir, but to really explain the process of registering to vote, because I've heard so much misinformation, that all you have to do is, if you register your car, you just tell them that you want to vote, and they'll put you on the rolls. Now, I don't know that's not true, but I'm standing there registering people to vote, or checking them in at the poll, and I have to explain this to them.
Okay,
Oh,
the question comes from Janice Schoen, and she is a poll worker, and she tells us that she has people walking up to her disputing the veracity of our voting system and our election system just based on a signature not showing ID. And Janice believes that we need to better educate our voters on how our election system, voter identification work. Is that right? Get up here at this point.
The question is, we really like to see the state come in to civic groups or to different groups and explain how people actually get on the rolls to vote. Because as a poll worker, I was questioned a lot. How do we really know that these people are Americans? Because I know the opposition, and I've heard the opposition say that all they do is, if they're registering their car, they go ahead and say, yes, register me to vote. Now, that's not true. It goes up to Carson City. They find out if you're a citizen, if you have a green card, I don't think you can vote, but there's different on the rolls. But the way the opposition makes it sound like we are inundated with people voting that have no right to vote.
Thanks, Janice.
I'm going to turn this over to Maria. I will say it's a good question. It's something, as the election nears, that we will program.
Which is awesome. One thing I will say is, yes, and I think the perfect way to do that is, I think our Secretary of State, and we have an awesome registrar of voters, new registrar here, Lorena Portillo, whom we've worked with, and we try, especially in election years, to get them out. So, I think if you're part of groups, if you're part of, or if you want to get them out to an event or something, I know especially the registrars of voters are always happy, especially during election years, to come out and explain the whole process from registration. They'll even bring out machines with them to say, this is how you vote. This is how it works. This is how it's not actually connected to Wi-Fi, and it can't be all of that. They go through all of that, and BBP can always help facilitate that community relationship. We are in communication with both state offices and local offices, and I think that's a great thing. I know the Secretary of State this past legislative session advocated for increased budgeting, and they got it for sort of community relations and marketing, if you will, because they have to get that all approved by the legislature. So hopefully you'll see more. I know Secretary of State Aguilar is very passionate about that, about going into the community and fighting disinformation. And we're also hoping to continue to partner with them and get funding in the door to do more of our work around voting information. The other thing that I would say is also you all can be sort of the spokespeople for that, especially if you have registered people to vote yourself, if you have been volunteering and you're registering someone to vote, but also if you have, and I always challenge people to do this, in an election year, go and observe how they count the ballots. Go to Trade Center. It's actually open to the public. Anybody can go. They legally have to let people go in. You might have to go in shifts because there's small rooms sometimes where they go, but they legally have to let the public go in and watch. And that's what these people don't understand, that the process is actually extremely transparent. From the moment you register to vote, automatic voter registration does have guardrails for non-citizens. It automatically kicks them off if they cross-check it with so many different documents. And if you're not a citizen, if you've got a green card, all of that, you can't register to vote. It doesn't happen. You actually get a notice saying you attempted to register to vote. You cannot vote because of your immigration status. And I from that to the counting of the ballots, it's very transparent. And so I would encourage folks to go out there, because one of the things that I noticed, especially our former executive director and I, we went out and we would sit at the Trade Center here in Northern Vegas and watch all the ballots being counted. And when we would be interviewed, or when we would have commenters on social media, or when we were debating right-winger Alan Stock on the radio, and we would talk about, well, we've actually been in the room and we can tell you that is not happening. They're like, oh, well, they get very flustered when you actually show the transparency. So I think, be part of the process and say, no, I've been there. I've been in the room, or I have registered someone to vote, or, share that. People that, I know whenever I share with people, I had a friend who accidentally registered to vote because someone was like, oh, I think you can vote because you have a green card. It was an innocent mistake. They registered to vote. They got a letter saying you cannot vote. And once you tell people the facts and disarm them with that, if you're part of the process, it helps bring in more, it helps bring more facts into the conversation. And I would always say to those people, why don't you go out and register people to vote and learn the process? Why don't you go out to Trade Center and observe the process? And I can assure you, you're going to find out you're wrong. So I'd also challenge all of those people by saying, come be a poll worker. Anyone can do it. And you'll find out what the real process is. Because I've been there with right-wingers in the rooms where they are asking all these questions about, well, what is that? And they're trying to find the conspiracy. And they are so frustrated that they cannot find the conspiracy and so flabbergasted that a lot of them just leave. And I'm glad that they leave because they were proven wrong. So I would challenge you to challenge them to be part of the process if they care so much.
Next question. Eric, go ahead.
But the difference between facts and objectivity is on. The women say we came out of the dark ages or whatever. And then our own facts are determined by objectivity and rationality. But anyway, let me just one of the possibility of shifting the terminology from politics to policy. And of course, there's been some great policy that energy improvements, the energy parts and the infrastructure things that have occurred, even with a very tight majority that have occurred President Biden and the leadership there. So anyway, what using the term?
Okay, so this question comes from club member Eric Young, and his question is it possible to shift the discussion from politics to policy? Joe.
That is what we try to do all the time. In fact, it's beyond boring to do sort of the horse race in politics. Who's ahead and why, and that's what they want us to do, is to talk about that, to talk about their popularity. What less interesting though, and I think it's interesting the policy that's behind everything that they're saying. They want to get elected to enact policy. The issue comes with the public. Unlike you, Eric, they're not. The public doesn't always want to hear about policy. It's not that interesting. It's on its face, I should say, to put it that way. It's up to the media to make it interesting, to sort of humanize some of these technical, difficult issues, even issues as boring sounding as, taxes. That's just such a broad general term. It's up to the reporter and the media organization to figure out a way to make it interesting to people to read and to listen to. We're going to have much more difficulty doing that, and we've already had more difficulty doing that because of the decrease in size of the media. You're seeing an increase in people who aren't professionals on TikTok and on social media. And I don't know if you probably don't pay as much attention to this as I do, but National Public Radio has cut staff. The LA Times has cut staff. The San Diego Tribune recently cut staff. And that's on top of staff cuts that they have been making over the last 15 years as well. Ever since I've been in this business, it has been, cuts every single year. At first, it was because they weren't making the massive profits that they were making before. And now it's because they're barely making any profits and they're trying to figure out ways to survive. So if you want to, everything that people are talking about here tonight takes energy, individual energy, which not all of us have. At the end of the day, working, just want to go home and, play a video game or watch a movie or something. But we don't have the luxury to do that anymore. And when that gets through to people, it will be a much better place. This country will be much better off. I think that is what this country probably had 250 years ago. There's an urgency to try to make things right. And people, maybe they're going to start recognizing that urgency. Maybe they have recognized it with the previous president that we've had, and they saw how the disinformation and the issues that just seem to crop up daily. I'm rambling now, and I'm not even sure what I'm saying. I'm going to turn this over to Maria.
I completely agree. And that's sad because I know that a lot of us, especially us, nerds that follow the legislative session, for example, or, what was in the Inflation Reduction Act is a perfect example. We did focus groups where when you talk about the Inflation Reduction Act in very technical terms, people were tuned out. They were like, oh, this is boring. And for us, it was like exciting. It's like, this is so impactful policy. Don't you understand? It's huge. But for them, it wasn't because they don't have that technical knowledge.
It's like the infrastructure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when we explained it when we explained it in much more, we call it human terms, as opposed to policy wonk terms, it actually, people started, favoring it a lot more. When we broke it down to their pocketbook, for example, and we asked questions, we said, how are you able to get your new job? And they said, well, this small business that I'm working in got a loan, and now they're able to bring on a couple more people. And we said, is that by chance a PPP loan? Because that was Congress that did that. My friend is getting a green job. Well, that green jobs are part of the IRA. There's going to be massive amounts of green jobs. And so once you break it down to you specifically, that's when people tune in. So I completely agree. I think, and we have to make it palatable, like Joe said, we have to make it palatable to them in a way that makes sense. And sometimes it takes some serious research on our end programmatically. I spent an entire year researching how to get people to understand Governor Sisolak was not a giant dictator trying to take their freedom away, and actually talk policy. And that's when we really found out that when you just throw numbers at people, it doesn't resonate. But when you get to their values, right? We found out that a lot of Nevadans like excitement, environmentalism, not in the activist sense, but in the, I like to go outside and hike on the weekend sense. And we talked about, well, Sisolak had some incredible, he is in tourism with the Get Outdoors Nevada folks in the Office of Outdoor Recreation. They're like, really? That's very interesting. So finding out how to make it palatable is how we make that switch.
By the way, if I sound cynical, it's because I am, but I am actually, I've been a reporter for a long time. I'm very hopeful for Nevada. I think I said that earlier. This place has changed for the better since I've been here.
All right, we have two more people with questions. Go ahead. Chris, you're up. Nick, sorry.
Earlier, we both talked about the importance of becoming more active in our consumption of information, basically. At the same time, it sounds uncomfortably close to, well, I did my own research and being on the other side. I think one of the differences between those two is sort of a trust in institutions and expertise. And we're seeing among certain members of the population erosion of trust in expertise and institutions. Do you agree with me that that's an enormous problem of what we're seeing, and how do we get that back?
All right, the question comes from club member Nick Christensen, who's asked in trust of information sites, and it's way too easy to fall into the trap of, yeah, I did my own research. Well, where did you get your information from, Joe?
I agree with you entirely. You're completely right. And how do you, I don't know how. I mean, it's difficult. I guess I'd say that it's hard because I'd like to have an easy, quick answer. There just isn't one. It's like the woman I talked about earlier, the expert on how to engage with people who view things completely opposite from you. It's a very slow process. And maybe you're talking to somebody about something you read in the New York Times, and you're talking to somebody who just read, like, I don't know, InfoWars. But maybe there's something in there, maybe there's a word or a phrase or something in there that's a commonality, that's similar, or that's related, that you can begin to talk about there. I just, it's a very difficult problem, very difficult situation. I can't force people to listen to NPR. We don't have a very big marketing budget at all. So it is a difficult problem, but I think Liebermann-Parraga might have better answers. It's because you have hired a person to work on disinformation in the Latino community. Maybe you want to talk about that.
Yes, that's the $1 million question, is how do we get trust back? Because that's also the other goal of malinformation and disinformation, is to undo trust in institutions, and that includes the media. And there is no quick answer. I think a lot of us are working on figuring out that answer. Good luck, Maite. But all of us collectively, I know in the world of communications, are trying to figure it out. But I would also say that that commonality is probably the key here, and sort of the non-researched fully by the experts way of saying that's slowly a way to regain trust in the institutions. I think one of the ways that I know that we're trying to regain trust is by really understanding the why people are falling for the disinformation and why don't they trust it. I think and one of the things that we're trying to do, especially when we have people with lots of money that want to do a poll, I know years ago I was starting to ask people, can we please, I want to know in the poll, why do people, or where do people get their news from and why? And I think hopefully we can get more funding to do that kind of polling. It's not a traditional way to poll people because they want to do the race polling of who's up and who's down and what phrase works or not. But I want to do more work around, why is it that you get your news from Facebook? And why do you trust that more than State of Nevada KNPR? Or why haven't you listened to KNPR? I think that's also part of the shift that we need to make in our work specifically, is we need to make it part of our political work, understanding the why.
Thank you. All right, coming up on our last question from Michael Herring, another club member.
I hear you about education, and I love that you do, from my background. I think education is important, but quite honestly, if you're talking about formal education of some sort, formal educational institutions, you missed the window. They're trying to convert adults, and if you haven't got them by the time they leave high school and maybe college, you're toast.
All right, the question and comment. I'm sorry, Mike.
So my real question is, what's the strategy we need to adopt to get over that point? And what I'm hearing is things I like hearing, which is going out, talking to people directly, and with applying policy in the sense of what does it mean for you, what's your benefit? We think it takes a lot of effort to go out and do boots on the ground and knock on doors. How do we even logistically create that sort of environment? And that's kind of a side thing, we need to create our own echo chamber, where we take the ideas that we think are good and helpful to people, we repeat them over and over and over again, like a media today version of committees of correspondence.
All right, So, Michael, if I might summarize, hopefully, the question was, when it comes to education, it's a bit late. We've missed the window. So how do we go about spreading the correct information to people who may not be receptive and may not have the ability to accept and listen to what you have to say? Is that fair? All right? You go, Joe.
Difficult question. Yeah, I think you're right. With education is to older people, very difficult. But younger people, you have to, critical thinking. It's not just, to me, it's not just education, it's how you educate and how you instill critical thinking. That what just was when I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, in the education program there, that was a word that came up from very early on, is critical thinking, and it's something that they really try to instill. So whatever you're learning, it's the thinking in the sort of the analysis of what you're learning and why it's happening is very important. How do you, I mean, what we're talking about is kind of going to what we're all talking about tonight, and groups like this one, there should be 1,000 other groups like this in Las Vegas. This is a massive city now, even though we all know it's a tiny, tiny mega city. We all know each other now. I mean, we'll probably know, leaving this room, we'll probably each know 10 people that we all each, every one of us knows. But you have to organize these kinds of groups, and it takes energy to do that, and it takes time. And that's probably not a satisfactory answer, but I think that's sort of the key to all of this. It's stuff that probably people didn't have to do 50 or 60 years ago, or maybe they did. I wasn't around, but it's very crucial today. And I don't know if the answer is to drum the same answer over and over and over into people's heads, but just to get people, as we were talking about tonight, just to talk to each other and to learn how, as Maria was saying, what she learned with the Obama campaigns, to learn how to talk with people who have completely different viewpoints. That seems to be what I see in this country is a big problem. Like nobody wants to talk to somebody who has a different point of view. And I'm sort of repeating what we've been saying all night, but Maria, if you want to add to this.
Yes, I completely agree that sadly with adults misvote. So I think hopefully we can get to a place where we got, for example, this legislative session where legislators are advocating for financial literacy in schools and wanting to make that part of, requirements to graduate and things like that, and putting that into the curriculums. I think we should add media literacy in K through 12 education, especially in high schools and even in middle schools. And the other part of it, that you were talking about is, I think building an echo chamber of facts is absolutely should be part of the strategy. I know that's something that we're trying to do at BBP with our national network, is create a program that we are calling Megaphone. You'll hear more about it, especially in 2024. But it's a way to have, especially people on social media, post things, social media content, especially things that are eye-catching, that are pleasing to the eye, that aren't, how do I want to say, stuff that looks nice, because that's also what people want, is they want things that looks nice, people that they can click on and find out what it is and share it to your own personal social media pages, and create that echo chamber in that community that unfortunately people with no facts have created. I think that's something that a lot of people in the middle and the left, and in the middle of the left have kind of sussed out, is that, okay, they've been working on this for a few decades now, maybe we should start our own echo chamber. And I think that's totally true. And I think if you see there's opportunities to share facts and have your own communal echo chamber where you're sharing information, especially on your social media, you might have a family member that might see it and say, why do you believe that? And maybe you can continue that conversation offline and start hopefully, eventually, after a few conversations, knock some sense into them.
Hopefully. And I will say that I'm sure everybody knows a family member or a close friend who has yet to see the light. I want to thank our two panelists tonight for an outstanding job, Joe Schoenmann with KNPR and Maria-Teresa Liebermann-Parraga